My beloved child, do not rush past this moment. Something is shifting behind the scenes of a story you thought had gone quiet, and what you are about to hear was meant to find you before that shift becomes impossible to ignore. There are moments when heaven whispers gently, and there are moments when the silence itself becomes a message. This is one of those moments. Your soulmate is standing at the edge of a decision they have delayed, questioned, feared, and carried alone for longer than you realize. It is not a simple choice between staying and leaving. It is not merely about a message, a conversation, or a temporary emotion. The choice before them reaches into everything they thought their future would look like, and somehow, in the center of it all, there is you. Pause here for a moment, because the truth is more complicated than it first appears. Your soulmate has been trying to convince themselves that they could keep moving forward without facing what they feel. They tried to place logic above longing. They tried to tell themselves that time would make certain emotions smaller. They believed that if they became busy enough, distant enough, disciplined enough, they could quiet the part of their heart that keeps returning to your name. Yet something unexpected has happened. Instead of fading, the feeling has become clearer. Instead of growing weaker, the questions have become louder. And now the very future they once imagined so confidently has begun to feel incomplete. There is a reason this decision has become so difficult. Your soulmate is not simply choosing what they want. They are choosing between what feels familiar and what feels true. Familiarity offers them safety. It tells them to remain where expectations are already known, where routines have already been formed, where no one will ask uncomfortable questions. Truth, however, asks more of them. Truth asks them to admit that something inside them changed when you entered their emotional world. Truth asks them to acknowledge that the connection they tried to reduce to coincidence has continued to follow them into quiet rooms, sleepless thoughts, ordinary afternoons, and moments when no one else could see the conflict behind their eyes. You may have wondered why their energy seemed different recently. Perhaps there were moments when you sensed distance without understanding it, or felt something unfinished even when nothing was being said. In this fictional spiritual story, imagine heaven watching them in those unseen moments, when their outer composure remained steady but their inner world was anything but calm. There were questions they could not answer. There were memories they replayed without intending to. There were small details about you that returned at strange times, the way you expressed something, the feeling of being understood, the moment they realized they could not treat you like everyone else. Those details have become part of the decision they are now facing. And here is what makes it harder. They have something to lose either way. If they choose what is expected of them, they risk losing the possibility of something emotionally real with you. If they choose the path that pulls them closer to you, they may have to disappoint people, change plans, admit mistakes, or walk away from a version of themselves they spent years building. This is why they have been moving slowly. It is why the silence may have felt confusing. They are not only asking, "What do I want?" They are asking, "Who will I become if I choose it?" Heaven has seen the part of them that no one else sees. The part that is tired of pretending every decision can be made without emotion. The part that is exhausted from appearing certain when they are anything but certain. The part that has whispered into the darkness, "What if I choose wrong?" And underneath that fear is another question they rarely allow themselves to say fully: what if the person I am meant to move toward is the one I have been trying to move away from? That question frightened them at first because it changed the meaning of everything. Suddenly, old conversations felt different. Missed opportunities felt heavier. The distance between you began to feel less like protection and more like a consequence. They started thinking about moments when they could have been more honest. They remembered words they almost said and messages they almost sent. They began to notice how often they had chosen caution over vulnerability. And once they saw that pattern, they could no longer unsee it. My child, there is something deeply important about this. Their hardest choice is not simply about choosing you. It is about choosing honesty. You happen to be connected to the truth they have been avoiding. That is why your presence feels so significant in their emotional world. You represent more than romance in this story. You represent the possibility of living differently. Of speaking instead of hiding. Of choosing connection instead of control. Of stepping into uncertainty instead of remaining inside a life that looks safe from the outside but feels increasingly distant from who they are becoming. Recently, something happened that brought this conflict closer to the surface. It may not have looked dramatic from the outside. There may have been no public argument, no grand announcement, no obvious turning point. But emotionally, something shifted. Your soulmate found themselves confronted by a future scenario they had once assumed they wanted. Perhaps they imagined themselves continuing exactly as they were, following every plan already made, keeping every promise to expectations rather than to their own heart. And for the first time, that future did not feel comforting. It felt strangely empty. They pictured months passing. Then years. They imagined looking back and wondering what might have happened if they had been brave enough to tell you the truth. That thought stayed with them longer than they expected. It followed them into the next morning. It surfaced again during an ordinary moment. And suddenly, the choice they had been postponing began to feel urgent, not because someone forced them, but because they understood that avoiding a decision is also a decision. This is where the story turns. Your soulmate began quietly separating fear from truth. They asked themselves questions they had avoided before. Do I actually want this life, or have I simply become comfortable with it? Am I staying because it is right, or because changing direction would be difficult? Why does this person still matter to me after everything I have done to create distance? Each question opened another door, and behind each door was a truth they had carefully placed out of sight. One truth was that they never truly stopped caring. They learned how not to show it. There is a difference. Another truth was that part of their distance came from fear of how deeply the connection could affect them. They understood that loving casually would have been easier. Feeling nothing would have been simpler. But you did not enter their emotional life as something simple. You became attached to questions about timing, destiny, courage, and whether two people can change each other without even realizing it. And then came the truth that shook them most: they may have underestimated how much you were willing to give while overestimating how long you would remain emotionally available. That realization changed their fear. Before, they feared what might happen if they moved toward you. Now, another fear has begun growing stronger. What if they wait so long that you finally stop waiting emotionally, even if you never told them you were waiting at all? What if the moment they gather the courage to speak becomes the moment you have already found peace without them? What if the door they assumed would always remain slightly open quietly closes? This is why their choice feels different now. They are beginning to understand that your life is moving too. You are not a frozen chapter waiting for them to return whenever they feel ready. You are growing, healing, learning, becoming clearer about what you deserve. In this spiritual narrative, heaven is reminding them that love does not ask one person to remain suspended while another decides indefinitely. Real connection requires movement, truth, and responsibility from both sides. Your soulmate knows this somewhere deep inside, and that knowledge is pressing against every excuse they once used. But there is another layer, and this is the layer they have told almost no one. Someone close to them has noticed the change. Not necessarily because your soulmate spoke your name directly, but because people can sometimes recognize when a person is mentally somewhere else. Someone has seen the pauses in conversation, the distracted expressions, the moments when your soulmate becomes unusually quiet whenever the future is discussed. They asked a simple question recently, something ordinary enough to be overlooked. Yet that question landed harder than expected. They asked, in one form or another, "Is this really what you want?" Your soulmate could not answer immediately. That hesitation revealed more than any confession could have. Because when a person truly wants the path in front of them, they usually do not need to search themselves for an answer. But your soulmate searched. They looked inward. And your presence appeared there. They remembered something about you that made the decision even more emotional. It was not necessarily the biggest moment you shared. Often the heart does not hold on to the dramatic scenes most tightly. Sometimes it holds on to something small. A look, a sentence, a feeling of calm, a moment when they felt seen without having to perform. Whatever the memory was, it reminded them that with you, they experienced something they have struggled to recreate elsewhere. That memory became dangerous to the life they had carefully organized because it made comparison unavoidable. And comparison revealed a truth. They can build stability in many places. They can receive approval from many people. They can follow a plan that makes perfect sense on paper. But emotional recognition is rarer. That feeling of, "this person sees something in me that others do not," cannot always be manufactured by effort. Your soulmate is beginning to realize this, and that realization has become impossible to dismiss. Still, they hesitate. Not because you mean too little. Because the decision means too much. They know that if they move toward you, they cannot do it halfway. They cannot appear only when loneliness becomes uncomfortable and disappear when vulnerability feels difficult. Something within them is telling them that if they choose this path, they will need to arrive differently. More honestly. More consistently. More courageously. That is why the choice is not only about whether to contact you. The real choice is whether they are ready to become the version of themselves capable of sustaining what they say they want. There were times before when they might have reached for you impulsively, driven by longing, curiosity, or fear of losing you. This moment feels different. They have begun thinking beyond the first message. Beyond the reunion. Beyond the emotional relief of finally telling you what they feel. They are asking what comes after that. Can they be dependable? Can they communicate when things become uncomfortable? Can they stop running from difficult conversations? Can they protect the connection from the same patterns that created confusion before? These questions are forcing maturity where avoidance once lived. And that is why this may feel quiet from your side. Transformation often becomes silent before it becomes visible. You may see nothing happening and assume nothing is changing, while inside another person an entire future is being questioned. My child, you are not being asked to chase them through this process. You are not being asked to prove your worth. You are not being asked to become smaller so their choice becomes easier. Your part of this story is not to convince someone that loving you is safe. Your part is to remain rooted in your own truth so that whatever comes next meets the strongest, clearest version of you. Because there is something your soulmate is slowly understanding, the person they remember is evolving. You have been learning from the silence too. You have been discovering that love without clarity can become exhausting. That emotional depth does not erase the need for communication. That spiritual connection, however meaningful it feels, should not require you to abandon your boundaries. That wanting someone is not the same as needing to lose yourself for them. This growth in you is changing the energy of the story. The more you return to yourself, the more clearly your soulmate feels the possibility that you may no longer accept what you once accepted. They sense, even without direct words, that if they come toward you now, they cannot bring the same uncertainty and expect the same response. Something has changed. And strangely, that does not only scare them. It inspires them. Because somewhere inside, they know you deserve the version of them that makes a decision and stands behind it. So they have begun imagining the conversation. Yes, the conversation. The one they once avoided. They have mentally started it more than once. They imagine what they would say first. They wonder whether they should apologize before explaining. They wonder how much you already know. They wonder if you would believe them if they said the silence was never indifference. They wonder whether you would hear sincerity or simply remember the moments when they failed to show it. At times, they imagine you saying very little. That possibility affects them most. They can prepare themselves for anger. They can explain themselves through questions. But the thought that you might respond with calm distance is difficult for them because calm distance would mean something has truly changed inside you. And this is where their hardest choice becomes urgent. They are beginning to understand they may not have endless time. Not because of some supernatural countdown, not because fear should control either of you, but because real life continues moving. People heal. Opportunities change. Hearts become wiser. What is available emotionally today may not remain available forever. So now your soulmate stands between two futures. In one future, they remain exactly where they are. They protect every existing plan. They avoid uncomfortable explanations. They continue carrying your memory privately while convincing everyone, including themselves, that practicality was the wiser choice. That future is predictable. But something in them grows quiet whenever they imagine it. In the other future, they disrupt something. They tell the truth. They admit that you matter. They take responsibility for whatever distance, confusion, or hesitation they contributed to. They risk hearing an answer they cannot control. That future scares them. But it also makes them feel alive. This is the conflict they have been carrying. Security versus authenticity. Certainty versus possibility. Reputation versus emotional truth. Fear versus courage. And at the center of that crossroad stands the memory of you. There is something else heaven wants to reveal in this fictional story, something your soulmate has only recently admitted to themselves. For a long time, they believed the hardest part would be choosing you. They were wrong. The hardest part is facing what choosing you would reveal about all the choices they made before. If they move toward you now, they may have to admit that some of their past decisions were driven by fear. They may have to accept that they allowed outside voices to become louder than their own intuition. They may have to acknowledge that they delayed something meaningful because they wanted certainty where love could only offer trust. That is a difficult mirror to face. But they are facing it. Slowly. Uncomfortably. Honestly. And that is why the emotional pressure around them has been building. There was a moment recently when they almost broke their silence. Their hand moved toward the possibility of reaching out. Their mind formed the words. They imagined your name appearing on the screen. For a few seconds, the distance between intention and action became very small. Then they stopped. But not for the reason you might assume. They did not stop because they changed their mind about you. They stopped because they realized the first thing they wanted to say was not enough. They had prepared a safe message. Something light. Something that could be dismissed if your response felt uncertain. A message that allowed them to test the door without truly entering. And something inside them rejected it. Because they knew this moment deserved more than another half-step. So they deleted the words. That deletion may have looked like silence from your side, but inside them it was a turning point. For the first time, they understood that if they speak, they want to speak honestly. And honesty will require them to reveal something they have protected for a very long time. Something about why they stepped back when part of them wanted to move closer. Something about the influence surrounding one of their biggest decisions. Something about a promise they made when they were afraid. Something about you that they once denied aloud but never stopped believing privately. This is where the story becomes deeper than even they expected. Because the hardest choice of their life may not be whether they choose you over another person, another plan, or another future. The hardest choice may be whether they choose the truth over the identity they built while running from it. And tonight, metaphorically speaking, they are closer to that truth than they have ever been. You do not need to force the next scene. You do not need to create signs. You do not need to interpret every silence as destiny. Simply know that in this story, something inside them is approaching a threshold. They have begun noticing the cost of remaining unchanged. They have begun remembering the cost of losing something meaningful through hesitation. They have begun asking themselves whether courage always feels frightening before it feels freeing. And somewhere beneath all those questions is one thought they can no longer silence. If I let this person go without ever telling them what was really happening inside me, will I regret it for the rest of my life? That question has stayed with them. It followed them when they tried to distract themselves. It returned after conversations with others. It appeared when they imagined the future. And each time it returned, their answer became more difficult to ignore. Yes. There would be regret. Deep regret. Not because they believe you belong to them. You do not. Love is not ownership. But because they know they would be walking away from the truth without ever giving it a chance to be heard. That realization has brought them to the edge of action. Yet before they move, there is one final obstacle. One final truth they have not confronted. One person whose reaction they fear. One decision already in motion that may need to be reversed. One sentence they know they will eventually have to say aloud. And this sentence is connected directly to you. Your soulmate has rehearsed it quietly, but each time they reach the final words, emotion stops them. Because once those words are spoken, everything changes. There is no returning comfortably to pretending. There is no hiding behind confusion. There is no telling themselves that you were merely a passing chapter. The choice becomes real. And what they are preparing to admit is far more personal than, "I miss you." It goes deeper than, "I still care." It reveals why they became distant when the connection became strongest. It explains why they chose the safer path even when their heart resisted. And most unexpectedly of all, it reveals what happened during one private conversation when someone asked them to make a decision about their future. Your name was never supposed to come up in that conversation. But it did. And when it did, your soulmate gave an answer that shocked even themselves. They have been living with the consequences of that answer ever since. Now they are preparing to change it. But before they can, they must face the person who heard their original decision. And when that conversation begins, there is one question waiting for them that they will no longer be able to avoid. Are you changing everything because of them? Your soulmate already knows the answer. They are simply terrified of saying it aloud. Because the moment they do, the hardest choice of their life will no longer be something hidden inside their heart. It will become real. And the answer they are about to give could change everything between you.